A dusty case file. A name long buried. A daughter who watched her father die without justice, now returned as the new chief of police. Serena Langford isn't here to play politics. She's here to finish what no one else dared start. The Echo Directive has begun. And nobody's safe. Caleb Monroe had learned how to live quietly. After 3 years in prison for a crime he never committed, after nearly 900 nights waking in a cold sweat, haunted by the sound of handcuffs in his head, he no longer believed that justice finds its own way. All he wanted now was to work night shifts at the auto shop on the south side of Eastbridge, go home at sunrise, eat dinner alone, and sleep until the world got dark again. Until that morning, when the old TV in the corner of the shop suddenly switched to a local news broadcast. There he was, Lieutenant Travis King, the man who had arrested Caleb at 17, now featured in a segment titled A Lifetime of Service, A Hero in Blue. The same man who slammed Caleb face first onto the curb over a broken taillight. The same man who had just happened to find a bag of untraceable drugs in his backpack. Now he was being celebrated, handed medals and applause. Caleb stood frozen, his hand tightening around his coffee mug until it cracked. King's face hadn't changed. Same smug stare. Same smooth voice of a man who'd never had to explain a thing. That night, Caleb pulled out a rusted tin box from under his bed. Inside, a handwritten calendar marking every day behind bars. And a crumpled note slipped to him by a court-appointed lawyer. Just take the plea. Getting out early is your best shot when you're a black man with no one backing you. He didn't know who knocked at 9:47 p.m. But it wasn't the police. It was a black woman in her early 40s, white shirt, deep navy blazer, and eyes that didn't flinch. Caleb Monroe, she asked. He nodded warily. Who are you? Serena Langford, she said. Newly appointed chief of police in Eastbridge. He stiffened. The police chief shows up at my house? At night? I didn't come to apologize for what others did, she replied, pulling a thick file folder from her bag. On the cover, 3 bold words were stamped in all caps, Echo Directive. What is this? He asked. A protocol to reopen closed cases that were never properly reviewed in court. We're re-examining 10 years' worth of files for signs of misconduct, including yours. Caleb looked at the folder, hand still resting on the door. And why the hell should I trust you? Serena didn't blink. Because I was once a kid too, watching my father get shot in front of our corner store. And I waited for justice. Just like you did. Caleb didn't speak. But something deep in his chest, something dull and constant that even time hadn't erased, began to shift. She placed the file gently in his hands. I don't need you to stand in front of a camera, she said. I just need you to tell the truth, so this system stops hiding behind silence. For the first time in years, Caleb felt like someone wasn't here to make him bow his head. At the far end of the street, a gray SUV sat idling silently under a tree's shadow. No license plate. From the driver's seat, a man in a baseball cap watched. No photos. No movement. Just observation. The same way Travis King used to lurk, before he laid a hand on a boy's shoulder and changed his life forever. The next morning, a sharp northeastern wind swept through Eastbridge, slicing through skin like a blade. It carried with it the chill of older seasons, where memory and reality collided without warning. Police Chief Serena Langford sat still by the 3rd-floor window, her coffee cold in hand. On her desk, a crumpled yellow envelope, no sender, no postmark, only one scribbled line in shaky handwriting. Don't forget who fell first. She opened it again. Inside, a photocopy of a shooting case from 1995. Victim, Isaiah Langford. Her father. Location, Fulton Avenue, just behind Johnson's Grocery. Involved officer, Travis King. Original note, subject acted erratically. Suspect reached for waistband. Words her mother used to read aloud again and again, as if understanding them could dull the pain. But Serena knew better. Isaiah Langford had only been carrying a bag of groceries and an old leather wallet. That file, long vanished when she was just 9 years old, was now in her hands again. Stamped across it in faint red italics. Closed, insufficient evidence. Serena leaned back in her chair and shut her eyes. Her mother's image flickered like an old film reel, standing on the courthouse steps, gripping her husband's blood-stained shirt, tears still wet as the news cameras panned away. No journalist asked questions. No explanation was ever given. Justice takes time, an investigator had told them back then. But Serena knew time doesn't heal. It only helps people forget. And now, she would make sure no one forgot again. She placed her father's case file next to that of Micah Shields, a 16-year-old boy beaten so badly his collarbone shattered, with evidence buried for 3 years. Beside it, Caleb Monroe's file. And dozens more, complaints dismissed for lack of probable cause. They all shared one pattern. Black. Legally unprotected. Pushed out of the system like they never existed. Serena rose, grabbed a marker, and wrote on the planning board. Echo directive. Reopen all conditionally closed cases from the past 10 years. Prioritize files with signs of systemic interference. Assign external review teams from Denver to lead investigations. She didn't need to ask permission. She didn't need anyone's approval. And this time, it wasn't just about Caleb. Or her father. It was for everyone who'd ever been forgotten. Across the city, in a dim bar off Winthrop Avenue, an aging man in dark sunglasses sat between two others in gray suits. His name was Carlton Graves, once a legend in the police force, and now a ghost everyone knew, but no one dared to name. Carlton sipped his old bourbon, voice rasping like sandpaper. If she digs deep into that case, he said, everything we buried will come floating back up. One of the men nodded. What about Travis? Carlton snorted. He's like a bloodhound. Loyal. Reckless. And that's exactly why he's dangerous. If the system wants to survive, we need to remind dreamers, this road has no room for heroes. Elsewhere in a small apartment on the south side of Eastbridge, Caleb Monroe drew the curtains shut. There were no SUVs parked outside anymore, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left the back of his neck. He turned back to the table, pulled out an old calendar from the drawer, and crossed off another day. Like Serena, he knew. The sleep of the wrongfully accused is never whole. And the ghosts, no matter how deeply buried in files, never rest easy. Nightfall in West Eastbridge wasn't like anywhere else in the city. Street lamps flickered as if fighting to survive each gust of wind, and Bunkers Hollow, the bar with no windows and no clocks, stayed open like the last place secrets could exist without being devoured by daylight. At the bar, Frank Delaney hunched over his drink, a battered leather hat shadowing most of his sun-worn face. He was 67, but the way he stirred his bourbon made it clear, he still knew every unwritten rule better than anyone half his age. His left hand, now slightly trembling with age, was once the hand that held the keys to Eastbridge PD's internal archive, and it had been Frank who decided what got recorded and what got lost. Echo directive, he muttered, voice rough like dying embers. That thing should have died while it was still a draft. A sound echoed behind him. The bar door swung open, letting in cold air and the heavy stomp of boots. 2 men stepped inside. One was tall, broad, red-faced from too much whiskey, Travis Keene, former patrol captain of the South Ward. The other was leaner, with cropped gray hair, Carlton Graves, the ex-internal affairs chief who used to clean up scandals before they ever made the news. They didn't need greetings. They just sat beside Frank, 3 rusted links and an old, forgotten chain. Men who had once ruled all of Eastbridge, now reduced to names whispered but never spoken aloud. Where'd she start? Carlton asked, pouring whiskey into his glass, no ice. Micah Shields. Caleb Monroe. And now, Frank set his glass down, gaze drifting. Isaiah Langford. That name shifted the air in the room. Travis Keene tightened his grip around the base of his glass. 30 years, Frank. That case is buried. You know I was just following orders. Yeah, orders, Frank said with a crooked grin. And which office gave that order? The department? Or the state governor, back when he was just the DA? Carlton downed his drink, then leaned his elbows on the table. Listen, Frank. I know you're old. And I know you're carrying more than any of us ever did. But if the Echo Directive cracks everything open, who do you think they'll come for first? Frank didn't answer right away. He stared out the foggy window, where headlights streaked past like rushed memories. Finally, he spoke, slow, deliberate. There are things, you bury long enough, people forget. But if even one crack shows, water gets in. And no wall ever survives that. What's that supposed to mean? Travis growled. Frank reached into his coat and pulled out a battered USB stick wrapped in a tissue. This is the last surviving copy of system logs from 2006 to 2018. Every lost file, every anonymous access log, right down to the reports you signed, Carlton. Carlton's face went pale. How long have you kept that? Long enough to know it's no longer my burden to carry. Frank looked directly at both men. If Serena Langford's going to uncover everything, then I won't stand in the way. I've been silent for 30 years. You two better start figuring out what you'll do when the sun comes up. He stood, left the USB on the table like a sealed fate, and walked out. Travis and Carlton just sat there, frozen. Outside, the rain had started, soft but steady. Like a warning that a flood always begins with a single drop falling at the right time. And tonight, the final lock had been removed from the door. The third floor of the Eastbridge Police Department was still dark when Serena Langford entered at 6:15 a.m. The sun hadn't yet risen. Morning mist clung to the windows. But the central conference room was ready. No formal memo. No official invitation. Just a single message, sent through the encrypted internal system. Emergency meeting, only those ready to face the truth. Within 30 minutes, 13 people showed up. Most were younger officers, a few from civilian units, tech, records, investigative audit. Only one over the age of 50, Lieutenant Pete Abernathy, 52, long considered the quiet bridge between the old guard and the reformers. Serena opened the meeting with a voice that wasn't loud, but cut like a blade. We're not just reopening a case. We're unsealing a memory this system spent decades trying to bury. She placed a thick folder on the table, labeled Echo 01, Internal Access Logs, 2010 to 2020. Nearby, a young man in a black hoodie set down a laptop, thin face, sharp eyes, Noah Delgado, 29, Internal IT Specialist. He was the first to trace the activity of the shadow account admin T. Noah projected a stream of data onto the main screen, timestamps, internal IP addresses, server names, and most crucially, logins that occurred in the dead of night, long past working hours. The admin.t account is a shell account, no identity, no creation history, but full admin privileges, Noah explained, pointing to a highlighted line. 3:17 a.m., December 12, 2015, EJ045 file accessed. Serena's brow furrowed. EJ045 was the file number for Isaiah Langford's case, her father. Every access coincides with a file being altered or disappearing, Noah continued. Only one person ever had clearance to use this account, Carlton Graves. The air in the room dropped like someone had cut a live wire. Lieutenant Pete spoke first, voice heavy. Carlton was my partner. 20 years in this department. Not all of us are to blame for a few rotten links. A young female officer countered immediately. And those rotten links dragged down an entire generation, erased from the record. If we're too scared to call it what it is, we're part of the cover-up. Voices rose, tension built. Some stayed silent, eyes downcast. Serena cut through the noise. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm asking you to choose the truth. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 bold black letters. Echo Directive. We'll review all internal files from 2010 to 2020. Focus on cases closed for lack of evidence, missing complaints, and unauthorized access. No exceptions. Even if the ones responsible were your old bosses, your drinking buddies, the ones who had your back. Pete clenched his fists. Silence held. Then he nodded. I'm staying. Not to defend the past, but to see if the future's worth it. Another nod followed. Then another. Until the entire group stood, not as a formality, but as if they'd just sworn an unspoken oath. Serena turned to Noah. Download the full logs to a secured hard drive. 2-factor encryption. Send an encoded copy to the DOJ. Noah nodded, fingers already flying over the keyboard. The meeting ended without applause. No one said thank you. Only the steady sound of footsteps leaving the room. While the whiteboard remained, 3 words like a warning to a generation still afraid to look in the mirror. Echo directive, no one stands outside the glass. The news spread like wildfire in a summer wind. Just hours after the covert echo directive meeting, a 47-second video appeared on TikTok from the account at Jasmine_Ross12. No editing. No music. Just a phone held low in someone's palm, capturing one of the most shameful moments in Eastbridge's justice history. In the video, a man in uniform, Officer Travis Keene, walks straight up to the front row of a courtroom. Without a word, he bends down, grabs the arm of a black woman in a gray blazer, and yanks her from her seat as if she were causing a disturbance. Travis's voice rang out, sharp, accusatory. Who do you think you are, sitting up front? Press? Or just another one of those setting me up? The woman didn't resist. She just looked straight at him, not with fear, but with disappointment. Someone shouted from the back. What the hell are you doing? The camera jerked, then froze just in time to capture the bang of the judge's gavel. Enough. That is the new chief of police of this city, Serena Langford. Within 30 minutes, the video passed 100,000 views. 3 hours later, it resurfaced on Twitter, reposted by none other than Cynthia Ross, veteran investigative journalist for the Eastbridge Sentinel and mother of the girl who recorded it. She captioned it simply, I had no idea my daughter was filming. But for the first time in years, I saw her see the truth. And capture it. CNN broke into special coverage. MSNBC ran a headline ticker. Police chief physically removed from courtroom. Public I brought in a constitutional law expert. Officer Keene didn't just disrespect a superior, he revealed the level of blindness a power structure can reach when it believes itself untouchable. The reality behind the footage was even more shocking. Serena Langford had attended the hearing that day as a silent observer. It was a criminal trial involving Micah Shields, a teenage victim of a disputed arrest, one of the cases being quietly reopened under Echo Directive. Though she hadn't yet intervened publicly, Serena knew this file bore the fingerprints of Travis Keene, who had been tied to multiple wrongful arrests closed prematurely without review. She came to listen. To observe. She wore no uniform. She announced no title. She simply wanted to witness a courtroom, not as a symbol of authority, but with unfiltered eyes. But to Travis? All he saw was a familiar, unsettling face. A woman who had recently been inside the precinct, reviewing old files, speaking with people he'd rather forget. In his mind, she wasn't a chief. She was a threat, one growing louder by the day. He didn't grab the arm of the police chief. He grabbed the arm of his own unraveling fear. At a small laundromat on Belmont Avenue, 73-year-old Gloria Monroe sat in front of a flickering TV, tears sliding quietly down her cheeks. I never thought I'd live to see it, she whispered. A cop caught in the act, using the very same grip he once used to keep folks down. In the south of the city, Mr. Earl Tompkins, 81 years old, a veteran and former civil rights activist from the 1960s, set his newspaper down on the table, eyes misting over. She didn't need to slam the table. Didn't need to shout. Just stood there. And for the first time, I felt hope wasn't dead. That afternoon, Mayor Graham Layton had no choice left. She held a press conference at City Hall, her face tight, dark circles under her eyes. "We've seen the video. That behavior is unacceptable under any circumstance," she declared, each word crisp and deliberate. "A multi-agency investigative panel will be formed immediately, not just to review Officer Keene's actions, but to examine the entire internal disciplinary structure of the Eastbridge Police Department." The new panel included 3 members, a civil rights attorney, a representative from the community, and a federal inspector from the Department of Justice. For the first time in over 20 years, Eastbridge PD would not get to handpick its so-called external oversight. Serena watched the press conference from her office, wearing the very same suit she'd been dragged out of court in. Not a wrinkle out of place. Not a single rebuttal. Just a quiet sentence to her assistant, Diane. "At last, they're seeing what they've tried so hard not to." Diane nodded. She placed a thick file on the desk, the master list of cases closed for lack of evidence from 2010 to 2020. Serena ran her fingers over the cover. Her voice was soft, like breath on glass. "Tomorrow, I want to visit Mrs. Loretta Shields." "Micah's mom?" Diane asked. "Yes. It's time the ones we left behind got invited back to the table. Not as witnesses, but as guides." Out in the suburbs, Jasmine, the 12-year-old girl, sat curled in her mother's arms and whispered, "I don't want them to forget what happened." Cynthia held her close, her voice catching. "You didn't just help me, baby. You helped this whole city learn how to truly look." 3 days after Mayor Graham Layton's press conference, the ECHO directive was officially launched. On the 3rd floor of Eastbridge Police Headquarters, a former equipment storage room had been transformed into a temporary data coordination hub. Whiteboards were packed with notes, timelines, and diagrams. 3 large screens updated in real time, tracking complaints, testimonies, and case files from 2010 to 2020. Everything that had once been stamped insufficient grounds or not enough for prosecution now came roaring back under scrutiny. Within 72 hours, over 164 case files had been submitted. Some came from local law offices, others from former police department employees. But the most notable testimony came from Margaret Ellison, a retired nurse who once treated Micah Shields when he was brought into the hospital, showing signs of fractures and extensive bruising. "The boy barely spoke," she said in the recorded statement. "But I remember clearly, his right hand was still gripping a broken shoelace, like it was the last thing he could control." In the internal briefing room, Serena Langford entered without knocking. She brought no folders, no aides, just herself, with a gaze sharp enough to silence even those who once wore lieutenant stripes. "The ECHO directive is not a campaign," she began. "It's a mirror. And before we aim it outward, we have to face it ourselves." The temperature in the room dropped. Some twisted pens between their fingers, others clasped their hands tight. No one spoke. Because everyone knew this day would come. A minute passed. Then the first person stood. Unit Commander Gregory Holloway, 64 years old, 38 years on the force. He said nothing at first. Just slowly unpinned the silver badge from his left chest, placed it in the center of the table, and looked directly at Serena. "I trained the 1991 Academy class. I was the one who taught Travis Keene how to handle crowd control. I was also the one who looked away when a use of force complaint was swept under the rug in the name of departmental stability. I'm not a bad man," he paused, "but I didn't have the courage to be a good one." Serena didn't interrupt. "Maybe I don't have the fight left in me to stand beside you," he continued, voice heavy. "But at the very least, I won't be one of the ones standing in your way." He turned and walked out in silence. No one stopped him. There were no claps. But after the door clicked shut, someone whispered, "I trained under him. He never bowed to anyone." Elsewhere in the department, 3 factions began to emerge. The first group, mostly younger officers like Tyrese Hall and Dana Yates, were shaped by the era of live streams, hashtags, and accountability. They jumped into the data hub, sorting records, building cross-reference queries. Tyrese even proposed a transparent dashboard to update the public on the directive's progress. The second group sat quietly. They watched. They didn't ask questions or offer help. Officers like Gerald McCall, once the right hand of Carlton Graves, were among them. They weren't resisting, but they weren't cooperating either. They were waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The third group, small but vocal, pushed back hard. They labeled the Echo Directive as a political stunt and a betrayal of the badge. Some whispered about filing early retirement paperwork. One even muttered, "Let the woke crowd clean house. Let's see how long they last." Serena took note of everything. Not to punish, but to understand. Who formed the foundation? And who became the cracks? As dusk fell, she stood by the window of her office, looking down at the street where Carlton Graves had once erased the evidence of a brutal assault. The wind stirred gently, lifting the dust of time. She whispered to herself, "If you want to rebuild the bridge, you have to know where it once collapsed." Saturday night, in a small studio in Brentwick, Caleb Monroe, the 27-year-old man once wrongfully imprisoned for drug possession, stepped onto the stage of Real Voices. No dramatic music. No flashing lights. Just a single chair, a silver microphone, and Malik Stroud, a middle-aged black host known for never interrupting once a guest begins to speak. The audience in the studio sat in complete silence. The cameras stayed still. The show was broadcast live, no edits, no cuts. On the screen behind them was one simple prompt. Tell us, from the moment everything changed. Caleb took a deep breath. His right hand still trembled slightly. But his voice, though not loud, cut clear through the air. "I was just on my way home after my shift. Exhausted. I stopped to buy a bottle of water and a protein bar. Then a car pulled up, no sirens, no lights. A man named Travis Keene stepped out. He paused, lifting his eyes toward the audience, as if searching for someone to hold onto with his gaze. He said my car smelled like weed. I don't smoke. Never have. But 12 minutes later, I was in handcuffs. And the only thing they used as evidence was a plastic bag I'd never seen before, found in my trunk." He didn't cry. But his hand clenched his knee. His eyes turned red. "The public defender told me, if I pled guilty, I'd do 3 years, maybe less. If I didn't, I'd face 10 for resisting arrest. So I took the first deal. But deep down, I knew I was signing a sentence for something I didn't do." Malik didn't ask a single follow-up. He only nodded, slowly. On an old couch in Wilmington, South Carolina, Richard and Maybelline Carter, both in their 70s, watched the program in silence. Maybelline gripped her husband's hand. She said nothing. But her eyes were already clouding. "Just like Trey," Richard murmured, voice tight. "All because his car was old, they pulled him in. Lost his scholarship. Lost his spark." Maybelline nodded. "Our kids don't need superheroes to save them. They just need someone to believe them. And to listen." Outside their window, a small plastic windmill spun in the spring breeze. Inside, a generation that once thought it had nothing left to give justice felt its heartbeat quicken again. Back at Eastbridge Police Department, Serena Langford stood before the media room. On the giant display screen, 2 hashtags climbed rapidly. Hashtag #IamCaleb. Hashtag Echo Directive. Hashtag Justice in the Open. She stood there in silence. A young officer approached and pointed at the screen. "This is the highest engagement this room's ever recorded. People aren't just sharing the clip, they're submitting evidence, old case files, formal complaints. There's even a video from 2012, shot by a college student after being pulled over without cause." Serena didn't smile. But her eyes burned bright. "We don't need to knock down every wall," she said quietly. "We just need enough light to see how thin it really is." When real voices ended, the audience didn't applaud. They stood. Not like a standing ovation, but like rising when someone enters a sanctuary. A new kind of reverence for an ordinary man who had just told a story that an entire system once tried to bury. On the screen behind him, a single line appeared. Caleb Monroe isn't an exception. He's just the first to hold the mic. Less than 48 hours after Caleb Monroe's appearance aired, social media was flooded with sensational headlines. Did Serena Langford cheat on her college exams? Is the new police chief really one of the people? Is she a political plant? None of these came from credible outlets. They originated in anonymous blogs, fringe forums, and bot-heavy accounts. But in the age of digital disinformation, one click was all it took to set a fire ablaze. One article spread like wildfire, featuring a blurry image of a supposed college transcript belonging to Serena, with one red-marked line, "Investigation suspended due to lack of evidence." Almost instantly, hashtags like #LangfordScandal and #FakeReformer crept into mainstream Twitter and Reddit feeds. But this time, Serena wasn't alone. She didn't need to rebut every accusation. She didn't call a press conference. Because while lies were still running the same old playbook, truth had already learned to move faster. At the Newsbench headquarters, an independent journalism collective based in Brentwick, Gabriela Ruiz, the reporter who once exposed abuse inside South Carolina's state prison system, dropped a 4,000-word bombshell with receipts. She traced the origin of the smear campaign against Serena, documenting it step by step. A Twitter account, @JusticeScanner, created less than 3 weeks ago, posted nearly 200 tweets in 48 hours, directly linked to a media firm previously contracted by a group of ex-officers funded by Carlton Graves. A network of comment bots flooding Real News articles with spam links. A leaked PR contract from a shadow company, quietly incorporated 2 months after Serena was sworn in. Gabriela ended with a line that went viral. Same tactics. New target. But this time, we're not looking away. At Magnolia Brew, a corner cafe on Parkview Street in East Bridge's multicultural neighborhood, the regular crowd of middle-aged and elderly residents wasn't talking sports or gas prices. They were printing Gabriela's article, handing out copies to neighbors who didn't use the internet. Dr. Elias Green, a retired physician, brought his tablet to the senior center and played the video for anyone willing to listen. No shouting. No panic. Just quiet resolve. "I used to believe fake news when I was younger," he said. "Now I know, if you don't fact-check, you become the megaphone for people trying to silence the good ones." A group of medical students from Howard University showed up too. They made posters, handed out stickers with a bold statement. "We stand with Serena." Serena sat alone in her office when the email came in from the legal team. Subject line: Source of smear campaign identified, evidence confirmed. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. A memory rose up, her mother, Louise, standing on the steps of City Hall in 1995, clutching her father's blood-stained shirt. Not screaming. Not holding signs. Just standing. Because back then, silence was all they were allowed. Serena whispered, "I won't be silent anymore, Mama." The next morning, Mayor Graham Layton held a press conference outside City Hall. He didn't speak about Serena, didn't defend her, didn't condemn her. He simply held up a printed copy of Gabriela's article and said, "If you're wondering what's happening to our city, this is your answer. It's not Serena Langford under attack. It's the truth. And we will not retreat." Moments later, a video clip went viral, a little girl, no older than 8, standing beside her mother in a public park. She pointed at a photo of Serena on a poster and said, "Mom, that lady looks like a superhero, but she doesn't need a cape." No music. No editing. Just raw words. It was shared over 2 million times in 24 hours. This time, the truth didn't need to fight back with weapons or slogans. All it needed was light. And people willing to keep the torch lit. Holding cell number 3 at the Eastbridge Police Department was no longer a throne room for Travis King. Now, he sat there, head lowered slightly, hands cuffed, his rumpled dress shirt missing 2 buttons. The overhead fluorescent light flickered in slow, tired pulses, like the dying breath of a power that once thought itself untouchable. There were no cameras. No reporters. Just 2 people, Serena Langford and Travis King. She entered without haste, holding a thick, unmarked brown file folder. No name. No label. But anyone in the system knew what that folder meant. The kind you bring when there's nothing left to bargain. Serena didn't sit immediately. She set the folder on the metal table. It landed with a cold, final thud, like the last gavel drop from a judge too tired to explain the obvious one more time. "You know what this is?" she asked. Travis didn't respond. There was still a faint flicker of his usual smug defiance in his eyes, but it had dulled, like sunglasses cracked under sunlight, no longer able to block the glare of reality. Serena pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Her voice wasn't angry or sarcastic. It was tired. Measured. Like a doctor explaining the terminal diagnosis, quiet, but undeniable. Inside this file is testimony from Micah Shields. A medical report from County Hospital confirming his injuries didn't match the detention record. Your system access logs, 32 instances of file edits. Complaint forms from 5 different victims, all marked insufficient evidence at the time. And finally, a copy of an off-the-book stipend agreement, authorized by Carlton Graves. Travis glanced at the folder. His hands twitched slightly on the table, like each name inside was a needle piercing a skin he once thought had turned to steel. Serena didn't force him to look. She flipped to a single page, a report bearing his verified signature. Subject uncooperative. Recommend elevated use of force. The victim? A 16-year-old boy with a shattered collarbone. No weapon. No companion. No video. Just the word of one officer. "I didn't come here for a confession," Serena said. "I came to make you face the mirror you made everyone else stare into for 15 years. Silence hung heavy. Finally, Travis spoke. Not loudly. Not shakily. Just hollow. "I did what the system taught me. It told me to go after the easy ones. Told me not to ask too many questions. It rewarded me for keeping the paperwork clean." He gave a short, bitter laugh, but it no longer carried the smugness of someone expecting to walk free. "I'm the perfect product of a machine that never stops." Serena didn't respond right away. She studied him, not out of curiosity, but out of regret. Regret for the path he chose, and for how far down it he'd traveled, without ever turning back. "No," she said. "You were part of that machine. But now it's breaking down. And you're its final sound before it collapses." She stood. Didn't bother closing the folder. She left it on the table, glowing like a silent indictment. At the door, Serena paused and turned back. They used to say silence was the only way to survive in this job. But now, your silence will be the reason you never walk out of here again. The heavy metal door slammed shut. Its echo clanged off the concrete like a gavel dropped on a long-forgotten trial. Travis King remained motionless in his seat, like a statue with its foundation ripped away. The noise of the old world had finally gone quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained, counting seconds in fluorescent flicker, as a man faced himself, with no more places left to hide. The hearing room at the Federal Oversight Committee in Washington, D.C. offered no cover, no escape routes. Every microphone was hot. Every camera locked in. And that morning, the man at the witness table wasn't just another suspect. It was Carlton Graves, former commander of internal affairs. The so-called architect of Eastbridge's stability. He sat stiffly, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, the collar starched like the cold grip he'd used to manage an entire department for 3 decades. But this time, his audience wasn't junior officers. It was Congress. And the entire nation was watching, live. A young congresswoman, Latina, hair tied in a high bun, thin-rimmed glasses, opened the hearing with one quiet sentence. Today, we are not investigating a man. We are examining the soul of a system. Behind her, the screen lit up with a sequence of erased access logs, each one matching a case that had been quietly closed without explanation. Words like admin T, insufficient evidence, handled internally appeared one after another, like a slow funeral march for justice buried in silence. Carlton Graves sat upright, answering only in short sentences. He didn't deny anything, but he offered no accountability either. I did what was necessary to maintain community stability. An older congressman from Georgia, black, nearly 70, leaned toward his mic. Stability for who, Mr. Graves? For those who've never been yanked out of their car at night for a broken taillight? For those who've never been locked away for a crime the system invented? He held up an old photo. An elderly man stood outside a red brick church, his face swollen and bruised, clutching a small wooden cross. His name was Elijah Monroe. Arrested in 1982. No charges. No apology. Just silence. And you signed off on that file, no misconduct found. Carlton froze slightly. He tried to steady his voice. I don't recall every individual case. The congresswoman cut in, her voice sharp with restrained fury. Of course you don't. Because when a system stops seeing victims as human, it only remembers numbers. But we remember them all. The back doors to the chamber swung open. 3 elders stepped inside. A black woman with silver hair wrapped in a purple silk scarf, walking with a cane. A Mexican-American man in a neatly pressed dress shirt, like he was headed to church. An Asian-American veteran, slow but upright with quiet dignity. They were the closed cases Carlton had buried years ago. But they didn't come today with rage. They came to prove that memory cannot be erased and doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It only needs to be honored. As the hearing neared its close, the congresswoman shut her folder. No more evidence was necessary. The system you defended didn't collapse from outside attack, she said softly, like snowfall before winter truly sets in. It collapsed because you poisoned it from within. Carlton didn't answer. He only lowered his head, for the first time during the entire proceeding. Not out of shame, but because he finally understood, when truth is spoken in full view of the nation, no matter how long you run, there is no place dark enough to hide. Outside the chamber, Serena Langford leaned quietly against the wall, her eyes fixed on Carlton. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, not to him, but to the 3 elders slowly walking out. The ones who, at last, had their voices heard in the most powerful room in the country. And this time, no one dared turn the microphone off. The skies over Eastbridge were cold and gray, the early November wind cutting sharp like a reminder that the season had changed its coat. The gravel path leading into the city cemetery was quieter than usual. No car horns. No hurried footsteps. Only the wind threading through old trees, and a final maple leaf falling, like a punctuation mark on a memory never spoken aloud. Serena Langford walked slowly past the weathered stone markers, her hand clutching a small brown fabric pouch. Inside were 2 things she had carried for 30 years. Isaiah Langford's grave sat in the southern row, beneath the shadow of a large oak tree. The stone was simple, bearing a humble inscription. Isaiah Langford, 1953 to 1995. A father. A citizen. A witness of his time. Serena sat down at the edge of the grave, saying nothing for a long moment. She reached into her pouch and took out a black and white photograph, her father standing in front of a grocery store, holding a brown paper bag, his smile as soft as Sunday sunlight. Beside it was a piece of a white shirt, yellowed with age, still bearing a dried bloodstain. Her mother had kept it all these years, not out of hatred, but so they'd never forget. Serena gently traced the fabric's worn folds. She remembered that afternoon with aching clarity. She was only 9. She'd stood at the door clutching a reading book, waiting for her father to return from the store. But instead came screams, police sirens, and the sight of her mother rushing into the street, then collapsing to her knees. She placed the photo and the shirt on the cool stone. One hand rested on the grave. Her voice was low, but steady. I wasn't there for your trial, Dad. But you were there for mine. She paused. Closed her eyes. The wind swept through the trees, whispering like the breath of time itself. I didn't rise because of anger, she continued. I rose because if no one dares to walk into the shadow of the past, the children of tomorrow will be forced to live in it forever. Serena hadn't come seeking forgiveness, nor applause. She had come to close a circle. To remind herself that justice isn't a final word, it's a repeated action. Quiet. Relentless. For those who no longer have a voice. She stood. The late sun broke through a thin veil of cloud, casting a light across the gravestone. It struck the dried blood on the shirt, making it gleam faintly, washed clean not by law, but by memory. At the edge of the cemetery, a man stood quietly behind a tree, an unseen witness. He had been Serena's schoolteacher once. He'd come to her house after her father died, bringing children's books and a line she would never forget. When you're not yet old enough to carry the scales of justice, you can still keep the flame of fairness alive. Now he stood there again, saying nothing. Not calling her name. Not stepping forward. Just smiling, because he knew that flame had not only been kept alive. It had been passed on, and it was burning bright. Serena turned away without looking back, because she no longer needed to. The gaze that had haunted her for 30 years had finally been met, with a trial, with a story no longer buried at the bottom of a case file, and with a promise she had kept to the very end. Dad's name will no longer be crossed out of the record. It will be the first chapter of a system where silence is no longer a death sentence. The sky remained gray, but something had changed. As if light had finally found a way through the cracks, the wounds, and the weight of solitude. 3 months after Carlton Graves testified before Congress, the federal government approved a decision without precedent. The ECHO directive was officially adopted as the national standard for internal investigations and oversight across every police department in the United States. No longer a lone effort by a woman once dragged from a courtroom seat under skeptical stares, the ECHO directive had become a symbol of collective responsibility, a reminder that truth doesn't only live in documents, but in the memories of those long forgotten. Serena Langford's office in Eastbridge was no longer a quiet place. Her inbox overflowed daily with hundreds of testimonies, pieces of evidence, and handwritten letters scrawled in shaky ink from all corners of the country. I was wrongfully arrested in 1993. I still have the original police report. I'm a nurse. I treated a boy with a broken arm. He told me he didn't fall. I managed the gas station security cameras. I'm willing to testify. None of them demanded anything, only one thing, to be heard. At the Eastbridge Town Hall meeting, Serena stepped up to the wooden podium. No stage lights. No dramatic music. But the room was packed, elderly folks in wool coats, high schoolers sitting cross-legged on the floor, all silent, waiting for a voice that didn't need to shout to be felt. She looked around, her eyes meeting each face, not seeking agreement, but honoring their presence. We are not here for revenge, Serena began. We're here to make sure tragedy doesn't repeat. There was no loud applause. But the words landed like a gentle rain after months of drought, quiet, but unforgettable. She continued, resting her hand lightly on the wooden podium. I can't change what happened to my father. Or to Caleb. Or to Micah. But I believe that every case reopened, every testimony once ignored and now read aloud, is our way of saying, we are still here. We were never erased. And now, we have a voice. Inside the Eastbridge Police Department, the hallways no longer echoed with silence or cold, white walls. A new oak-framed plaque had been mounted at the entrance. On it were 3 photographs. Micah Shields, the teen who was arrested and had his collarbone broken for resisting arrest. Caleb Monroe, the young man pulled away from justice, but who finally heard someone say, I believe you. Isaiah Langford, a father, a husband, an ordinary citizen, and the beginning of it all. There was no caption. No quote. Just their eyes, 3 people, 3 points in time, 3 commas in the same long sentence of justice. Those passing by no longer looked away. They stopped. They looked straight ahead. Some placed a hand against the glass cover, as if offering a silent promise to the past. Others said nothing at all, but in their eyes was something different, no longer fear, but resolve. Outside, late autumn light bathed Main Street. A newspaper girl smiled at a traffic officer. A young black student stood during his high school assembly and said, "I don't know if I can ever be like Chief Langford, but I know I won't stay silent." Back in her office, Serena set down her bag and looked out the window. The breeze nudged the corner of the American flag, and a soft gleam from the hallway plaque reflected in the glass. Change doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes, it begins when someone dares to walk into an old room, sweep up the broken pieces, and place a new promise in their place. No one left behind. No one above the law. And justice will no longer be silent.